outweighs the reward, our behaviors won't change, our beliefs won't change. So we have to get to a point where we're able to identify, no, I'm actually getting a real reward here. If you weren't getting a reward, you wouldn't be participating in it, even if the reward is subconsciously you wanting to prove to yourself how unworthy you are. See, it happened again. See, I am a piece of crap. And having the courage to say, no, I am worthy. And even though it feels hard to step into that right now, I am going to courageously do the work.
Welcome my guest, Kat Harris. Kat is the founder of The Refined Woman, a podcaster, online educator, speaker, author, and photographer. She has created the space to equip and empower women with practical tools to walk in their worth and navigate their lives grounded in freedom, vision, and wholeness. Her vision was to empower women to embrace their beauty, identity, and value through storytelling. She just released her newest book, Sexless in the City, a sometimes sassy, sometimes painful, always honest look at dating, desire, and sex. Well, Kat, I am so honored to have you on to share this space with you. Thank you for making the time. And this is such an honor. I love it.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Erica. I'm grateful to be here and grateful to be connecting with you. And yeah, I can't wait to just dive in.
Thank you. Well, I had the pleasure of learning a lot about you over the last couple of days. And what I really love to start with, especially, is your story, because I know you didn't grow up in a Christian home, but that really changed the trajectory of your life when you brought God into your life. So I would love if you could share a little bit about yourself and what led you into the purpose you serve today.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. I did not grow up in a faith-based home or a religious home, but I grew up in the South and I grew up in Texas, really during the height of mega church era, which mega church era is just big old churches with 20,000 people, size of stadiums. And I grew up in an era known as the purity movement in Christian culture. And that was really boiled down version, a marketing campaign to get high school students not to have sex outside of marriage. And so even though I wasn't growing up in a Christian home, being in Dallas, Texas in the 90s and early 2000s Christianity was the air I breathed. And so I was very familiar with the lingo. And then at some point along the way in high school, I became a person of faith, and my relationship with God radically changed my life. And very quickly on was giving these scripts, these sexual scripts, these do's and don'ts of how to approach dating and sex and sexuality and gender roles. And I honestly just really didn't ever question them, because I was like, oh, I love God and I want to do things, quote unquote, God's way. So good Christians don't have sex, so I won't have sex. And there were a lot of other narratives that I internalized that were pretty damaging. And so a lot of the work I do now today is really empowering women to have the tools to identify, women and men, but primarily women, because that's my audience. But I think all humans need this work, but really so much of the work I do today is supporting women to have the tools to identify what are the beliefs that I currently have. Where did I get those beliefs from? What was I taught at home, school, religious institutions, work, culture, about my body, about who I am as a woman, about my sexuality, about dating? And are those scripts working for me? Are they rooted in fear or freedom? And if they're rooted in fear, then how do we deconstruct that and rebuild a new and healthy sexual ethic rooted in freedom and abundance as opposed to shame? So yeah, that's a lot of the work I do. And I think it's just been interesting in that to identify the own shaming narratives that I was given and still be walking the road of faith and still identifying as a person of faith. However, it it looking so much different than it did now almost 20 years ago.
Wow. So just to unpack some of that. So what age were
Mhm.
you when you decided to wait till marriage to have sex?
So I was 16 years old when I became a Christian.
Mm.
However, I grew up in a household that we were taught from young, early on, not to have sex outside of marriage. And that wasn't, I actually asked my mom recently, why did you teach us that? I mean, you're not a person of faith. Like,
Uh-huh.
where did that come from? And she was like, well, it was just the right thing to do.
Mm.
And so I think it was and she said, well, that's what I was taught. And so I think even just growing up in the South, in or out of a religious home or not, it just was the quote unquote appropriate thing to do. So when I became a Christian and that was sort of the standard or the ethos of the community, it didn't really feel like news to me. I was like, yeah, that sounds about right. That's what I'm learning. And I learned that from home. And then I also figured, oh, I'll probably get married at 19 or 20. My mom got married super young, and I live in Texas, and everyone
That's
gets
what,
young
yeah, that's what
20,
happens.
21. Yeah. So if I am waiting until marriage to have sex, it's going to maybe be 3, 5 years max. Like, no worries. I can do that.
Hmm. That's so funny. Well, you do talk about the belief system. And when
Mhm.
you asked your mom that question, she's like, well, that's just what I taught. And so when you unpack these beliefs with the people you work with, that is really the foundation of the way we live life, is those certain beliefs that we grew up with, especially.
Mhm.
So that's what's really powerful that you mentioned. And I know that you mentioned on your website, and we talked about this beforehand, that there was one single focus that you had when you were in, I believe it was in high school, of
Mhm.
moving into college. And
Mhm.
just want to kind of touch on to that, because that led you into this helping women uncover these things about themselves, which you had a different path in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think even just what's so interesting, if we think about any of our stories, like, does anyone have a linear story? Like, I feel like I know one person that I
That's
grew up
strange.
with that ever since she was young, she wanted to be a nurse and she stayed the course and is a nurse today. And I'm like, wow, what is that like? What is
Yeah.
that like to be 8 years old and know what you're going to do for the rest of your life? But yeah, that definitely was not my story. I knew that if I wanted to go to college that I would need a full ride athletic scholarship and or just a full ride scholarship. And how that looked for me was through athletics, and I was a tennis player, and tennis was really my first love. It was I just like lived and breathed and died on that court. And so my goal was to get a full ride scholarship to a D1 school, and I got that. And meanwhile, I had also become a Christian, and that was shifting things around in my life and shifting different priorities. But really, about 2.5 years into my scholarship, I was very injured. I really, I had an injury from high school in my lower back, just a kind of a degenerative spinal issue, and was in a pretty abusive program,
Mm.
and just was so injured that I could hardly walk. And so I was just at a point in my life where I was like, first of all, this sucks. This thing that was my first love, I felt like was stripped from me because I was very injured. I didn't have a program team or leads or coaches that were listening. I was like, hello, I'm hurt. I'm hurt. I'm hurting. I'm hurting. No, you're not. Play through it.
Yeah.
And I was told to be playable, not healed. And so I needed to get out of that situation, and without going into too many of the NCAA rules and all of that stuff, I wasn't able to get out of my scholarship. So I ended
Mm.
up having to quit tennis and walk away from my scholarship. And in that move, I was like, well, everyone just keeps telling me that a major is just a piece of paper, which I don't think is necessarily true in hindsight. But in the moment, I thought, oh, if a degree is just a piece of paper, I'm really curious about my faith. So why don't I study the Bible and theology? So I
Mm.
ended up transferring to a small a small Christian school and was a Bible and theology major. And from there, I thought, oh, I'll get married. I'll graduate college with my MRS degree and I'll work at a church. And then from there, that did not happen. I ended up moving to California a few weeks after I graduated college, got into the nonprofit world. Then that transitioned to me being in the photography world, which transitioned to the editorial world, which led me to New York City and lots of other shoots and ladders and twists and turns of a ride as well.
Yeah, and because you were working with a lot of models and brands and magazines and all these things, you said there was a common thread that you heard from these models, and it seemed like, and just knowing the world because I've been in it for some time, women tend to feel like they're lacking something. Like women struggle with this, I am not enough. And it seemed like something that you really related to, that you kind of pulled out and you're like, I want to help women in this area. Am I correct? Is that kind of what happened, that you were noticing just women seeking something more?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think we all preach the message we need to hear the most. And I, for so much of my life, felt not worthy or not enough. In fact, I often felt too much and not enough all at
Hmm.
once. And so I was in this really nice little gridlock, and it was really easy for me to see the worth in other people and fight for that in other people. But for a long time, not being able to have the capacity to fight for that in myself. And I think when I got into the fashion industry, when I first started shooting editorial, I was shooting in the photographer's pit at New York Fashion Week. And I was one of two women at the time in the pit. It was
Wow.
myself. I was 24, 25 years old. And the other woman in the pit was in her 60s and had been shooting the runway circuit for decades. And so it was us two, and then a boys' locker room or a man. It was awful to get a spot and to get a good spot. I had to climb in between the legs
Mm.
of a slimy photographer, and he was groping me all through the shows. And then I would go backstage and see young girls that were teenagers or 15, 16, 17, and they're just trying their best to do their best at the job that they got hired for. And then I remember shooting on the runway and these men just hackling them like,
Mm.
oh, that girl, she's fat, or her boobs are too big, or her boobs
That's,
aren't big enough. And oh, she fell, ha ha ha. And I just was mortified at
yeah.
how these girls really were being treated. And at the same time, I was having a hard time moving forward in my career because I felt like a woman in a man's world.
Mm.
And I would try to network with these same photographers that I thought were really gross. But I thought, well, the only way you get ahead is by networking. And I think a huge game changing moment for me was when I was head shooter on my first editorial. And I just decided there's going to be no body shaming on my set. I'm feeding my team. So
Beautiful.
no, like you don't get to eat or eat, just have orange juice and cotton balls or whatever. So many of the models, would eat to, keep their figure. And I hired a team that I knew wouldn't gossip and that it would be just like a positive atmosphere. And it was such an incredible day. And
Mm.
at the end of the day, the model came up to me, and this woman had been on covers of many magazines all over the world. And she said, "You're the first photographer that's ever asked me my name."
Wow.
And she said, "Thank
Mm.
you so much."
Mm.
And that was a huge moment for me because I felt like, wow, actually, my femininity isn't a liability. It's actually one of my greatest assets, and it's my secret sauce. Because, first of all, I know what it feels like to feel insecure. I know what it
Hmm.
feels like to feel degraded. I know what it feels like to walk into a room and be judged by what I do or do not look like. And I this woman felt safe because she knew I wasn't trying to take advantage of her, try to get her to take her clothes off in inappropriate ways. And so yeah, I mean, the I feel like those were sort of like the beginning tremors for me of perhaps starting the brand I have now of the Refined Woman, of
Yeah.
just really having a space that allows a woman to be heard, to be seen, to be known, to have the
Beautiful.
tools to stand up for herself in her life and uh, just dismantle so much of the painful toxicity that we receive for existing and breathing as a woman.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. And it does seem like that was kind of the starting point of this revolution for you of helping others. And so, your brand, the Refined Woman and Refined Woman Collective podcast, what does a refined woman stand for you?
Yeah, I think refined, I think of it as being refined by the fires of life. You know, going through life and showing up not perfectly, but just honestly how the imperfections and the fumbles of our lives are actually the spaces where we experience our biggest breakthroughs. And
Mm.
yeah, so I think that's what it kind of means for me is come as you are. You have a seat at the table. Let's move through life together, not with that shiny mask of perfection on, but in community and in ways that we can challenge and sharpen and grow with each other.
I love that definition. And it's funny because when you hear the word refined, you think polished and perfect. But actually,
Mm,
the way you break it down is more like we are refined just by being perfectly imperfect as we are,
mm,
and to show up and be seen and worthy as we are, as
mm.
we go through life and our struggles. That makes us so beautiful, all
Yeah.
the, imperfections per se. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. There's this, I talk about this in my book, but there's this Japanese art called Kenzugi. And the concept means to literally join with gold. And
Mm,
the as legend has it is that in the 15th century, there's a Japanese commander who shattered his favorite tea bowl. And he was devastated by losing his favorite tea bowl. So he sent it out to his workers to fix it. And it came back to him and it was stapled together with these big, cumbersome metal staples. And he didn't like it. And so gave it back to them, try again, do something new to it. And in this moment of inspiration, one of the artists created a glue that was infused with like the finest gold powder. And
mm,
so it was literally a very, very, very priceless, expensive gold glue. And they meticulously, this artist meticulously glued the bowl back together with this golden glue. And so the commander gets the bowl back and instead of the broken pieces being hidden, they're highlighted more than ever with
oh,
the
that's
gold
beautiful.
veins throughout the whole bowl. And the idea is that perfection isn't the end goal, but that when brokenness happens, brokenness doesn't have the final word, but only really through the painful process, the meticulous process of restoration, do then our stories become priceless.
Mm.
And the idea is that the bowl was valuable beforehand, but it was only through the breaking that it became this priceless piece of art. And so you can even, I
Beautiful.
feel like I need to get one of these vases or bowls, but you can Google Kintsugi and see these beautiful vases and bowls that have literally been shattered and then glued back together with gold. Um,
That's
so
such a
I,
beautiful story and such a great picture to put towards like us as humans. Just like
mhm,
we've all endured some sort of trauma, if you want to say, or
mhm,
pain, but we always rise above it and we learn more lessons that make us stronger, that lead us towards our highest self. So I think that's so beautifully explained in that art. I love it.
mhm,
And you talk about the power of the story, of sharing our
mhm.
story, and why do you think it is so important that we do share our story and how that could help connect more to ourselves and others?
Yeah, I mean, I go back so often. I think about the Simon Sinek TED Talk that went viral so many years ago, how great leaders inspire action. And Sinek talks about his golden circle theory that every company knows what they do. Some companies know how to do it well, but very few companies know why they do what they do. And it's the companies and the leaders that are in touch with a vision, a deeper sense of purpose, their why, and are able to communicate that are the most successful businesses and leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Apple just creates computers and essentially MP3 players. Why are they consistently on the forefront of sales in every sector of technology? And it's because they're getting to your heart. Think different, be innovative. And so they're inviting you into a story. And Cynic says that Martin Luther King Jr. didn't say, I have a plan. He said,
Yeah.
I have a dream.
Yeah.
He enrolled people into a greater vision. And I think the idea there is stories transform people's lives. Rules don't.
Mm-hmm.
And logistics don't necessarily, or the perfect 10-step plan, but it's when you collide with another human being, when you experience the humanness of life with another person. And I think for me, what feels so compelling about story is it shows me that I am not the only one, because so often in our pain or in our disappointments, it can feel like no one understands,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm in my friend group, I am always the friend. Why is the breakthrough always happening in other people's love lives, but not mine? Why is everyone else getting the promotion, but not me? And then when we bring that darkness to light, it loses its power. And then we also know there's a whole realm of people that have gone through the same thing, who are in it, who can cheer you on, who you can see their breakthrough. And so sometimes we have to see something to be able to believe it for ourselves. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's one of the most powerful reasons and tools for storytelling is it humanizes us. It lets us know we're not alone. It shows us how, if it's possible for them, it's possible for me. I think it restores part of our humanity and brings a sense of connection that
Mm.
every human longs for. We all long for connection and intimacy, and to see and be seen, and to know and be known.
I completely agree. I just wanted to hear it from you. And so it
Mhm.
could be emphasized in this
Mm.
episode of the power of our story and being
Mhm.
vulnerable, and also this acceptance and feeling we're worthy, that we deserve to be heard just as everybody else. And I think there's such beauty in that. So talking about, because I want to really get more focused on femininity and also sexuality, because that's your forte.
Mhm.
But I do know that how you help women is through, giving them the tools to feel empowered and feel that they have a voice and that they are meant to
Mhm.
be seen and heard. So how do you help somebody go through that process of, for example, feeling worthy again?
Gosh, I mean, I feel like so much of this is being willing to go through the deep waters of reflection of your past. I
Mm,
really think that until we look backwards, we're unable to look forward. And until we have the courage, it takes real courage to heal the trauma of our past. Until we heal that trauma, it's literally stuck and trapped in our bodies, and it's on repeat. Like, we are pattern makers. Our brains are designed to create patterns. And that's why so many people who grew up in abusive homes either marry or become partners with abusers or become abusers themselves. It's because there are trapped cycles of trauma in our bodies and in our lineage. And until we really have the courage to go back and
mm,
heal that and say, no, just because it was that way doesn't mean that it's going to be this way with me moving forward. The buck stops here. I'm creating a new reality. And really, I think so much of what the faith journey is having the capacity to look at our circumstances, because we have beliefs, because we've had very real experiences, whether it's men aren't trustworthy, men aren't safe, because you've experienced for the umpteenth time that a man in your life who's supposed to be safe has not been safe. And I think what the faith journey says is, here's my circumstances, here's reality. I'm not dismissing that. But is it possible that there's a more ultimate reality? Is it possible that just because that's the way things were, that that's the way things have to be moving forward? I think faith gives us the permission to reimagine how life could look. And I think also what I really try to walk clients through is for everything that we're going, every pattern in our lives, every frustration or breakthrough we're trying to have when we're stuck. There's a cost there's a cost to us. There's a price we're paying for believing, whether it's, gosh, I'm never going to get the promotion, or guys only want to be my friends. There's a price you're paying for that. You're not getting the relationship you want, but there's also a reward. Well, as long as I stay connected and adamant that that narrative is true, then I don't have to put myself out there. I don't have to risk disappointment. I don't have to risk rejection, because I am self-rejecting before I even put myself out there. So a huge thing that I walk through with my clients is, until the price outweighs the reward, our behaviors won't change. Our beliefs won't change. So we have to get to a point where we're able to identify, no, I'm actually getting a real reward here. If you weren't getting a reward, you wouldn't be participating in it. Even if the reward is subconsciously you wanting to prove to yourself how unworthy you are. See, it happened again. See, I am a piece of crap. And having the courage to say, no, I am worthy. And even though it feels hard to step into that right now, I am going to courageously do the work and be committed to that.
It's so beautiful. And that's so true that, I mean, unless we will avoid pain more than we'll obviously go for pleasure. Like pain is just like something we always avoid. That's what our brain is meant to do, is keep us safe. So it's so true that until the pain is more painful than the pleasure. Wait, am I saying that right? Until the pain is more pleasure. Blah, blah. You know what I mean? The pain has to be stronger, and that's what's going to drive us to change, basically. Yeah.
Or you have to get to, one of my pastors calls it the crystallization of discontent. The moment of there is no more. Exactly. And we call that rock bottom often for people who experience addiction. Like, it's not going to change until that person hits their rock bottom. And you see, well, that's not their rock bottom. That's not their rock bottom. But we each have to have that moment of crystallization where we say, no more. I don't care what I have to do, but I am willing to put my money where my mouth is. I am willing to do whatever it takes to walk away from whatever X may be.
Yeah.
And I think the beautiful and hard part about it is that has to come from an internal place. I can't want your wholeness more than you want it for yourself. And you can't want my breakthrough more than I want it for myself. I can say I want a 6-pack and say that I want to have that and go to the gym, but based off results, if I don't have that right now, so actually I don't want that right now. And so until that, I don't want a 6-pack. Bless you if you have a 6-pack. But just an example of, until we are internally motivated, true transformation or lasting transformation, sustainable growth won't happen.
That's a really good point. And I never really focused on that it has to be an internal drive, but it's so true. It has to be coming from within to make that true change, that transformational change. Yeah. And so moving into feminine and sexuality and everything. So, you share this beautiful blog, and I found this on your website, Embracing Our Sexuality. So even if you haven't had sex, which is obviously some of your audience, yourself, and this could apply to, of course, either or, right? I realize, like, I feel more beautiful when I embrace my feminine side and my sexuality, and more I'm yearning and embracing that. And I believe more and more these days we forget about that feminine side, because women are standing in higher positions of, like, CEO positions or entrepreneurship. So they get kind of disconnected from this feminine side. So how do you suggest we draw closer to that feminine side and our sexuality and embrace it?
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like
unpack
there's
that
kind of a couple different things going on right now. And one, is it possible to be a CEO, to be a business owner, and stay in your feminine in that? We unfortunately live in a culture that says that leadership is masculine. Running a business is masculine. In fact, one of my favorite feminist is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she has an incredible TED Talk that's also a book called We Should All Be Feminists. And she talks about going to teach her first collegiate class. She got hired to be a professor, and she loves lipstick and florals and skirts. But when she got up that morning, for that first day of class, she wasn't nervous about the content. She knew she was a really good professor. She was more nervous about, what do I wear to downplay my femininity so as not to threaten the men? And if I want to be taken seriously, I need to perhaps not wear the red lipstick or the floral skirt, because the standard and the industry that she was in, and many of us are in, is the male wardrobe. So the business suit. So she says she regretfully wore like an ugly gray suit to class that first day, because she bought into the idea that being a woman is less than. And she bought into that idea because we're taught that. We're taught that the standard is masculinity. And so I really want to challenge that. Why can't I be a woman? Why can't I be in my feminine and be a business owner? I think the biggest breakthrough in my career happened that on that first editorial set of mine, where I realized, wow, me being a woman and me being the head honcho here, the best thing I had to offer was my womanness, was my feminine perspective. I didn't need to bark orders or dehumanize, and that's also not all men do that. And so I think I first just want to challenge the idea that to lead, you have to be masculine. I think the feminine is just as powerful as the masculine. And we often, water is correlated with the feminine, and more of like a lightning bolt uses the metaphor for the masculine energy. And it's so easy to be like, oh, the lightning bolt is powerful, it penetrates. But water created the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
Ocean water and tidal waves and tsunamis are powerful.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think
Beautiful.
first and foremost, let's debunk the myth that to be in leadership or to be successful, to have your voice heard, you have to be in your masculine. Because we know from research studies put out by the UN and stuff like that, that even peace treaties last longer, and conflict resolution conversations work out better when there are women involved in the process. So we all suffer by keeping women out of decision making rooms, and by believing that it's just a masculine job. So that's first what I have to say about that is, let's have the courage to be in our feminine in the workplace. And then second, I think the question is, what does femininity mean to you? When you said you feel in a better place when you're connected to your femininity. So my question would be, what does that mean to you? Is that you wearing a certain fabric? Is it more of like a way of being? I know for me, I ask myself questions like, when do I feel most beautiful? When do I feel most connected to my heart? When do I feel sexy? When do I feel powerful? And I think, unfortunately, I just can't answer that question. But for every woman, you get to ask yourself, what does femininity mean to you? For me, I can feel my most beautiful and my most sexy when I'm in my workout clothes and when I am dripping sweat, no makeup on, my hair is back. That's when I feel so connected to my feminine. For one of my other best friends, her and I couldn't be more night and day different, but she like wakes up and puts on her contour and, is done dressed to the nines. And that's what makes her feel womanly and feminine. And so I think it's really identifying for yourself, what does femininity mean for you? And how can you make steps to embrace that, even in tiny ways throughout your day? And then the question of, how do I embrace my sexuality in a way that feels supportive? I think it first starts with expanding our vision and definition of what sexuality is. And I think when we think of sexuality, we often think of things like physical attraction or sex or orgasm, physical intimacy. It's that physical part of the sexuality experience. And I think that if sexuality were a book, sex and orgasms would be one chapter. There's very many other ways to connect with our sexuality and sexual desire outside of the bedroom. And I think the reason for that is because I believe that sexuality, because I believe it's more than sex and orgasms, I believe that it is the human desire within all people, within all humans it's that thing inside of us that gets us outside of ourselves and into relationship with other people. It's that thing that compels us to go to that party when it would just be easier to continue that Netflix binge. It's that thing that makes you want to make eye contact with that person and say, "Hi, how are you? What's your name?" So I think sexuality can be sexual, but I think it also is so much more than that. And so just to get practical with that, I think a huge way to connect with your sexuality is to practice the art of being present.
Mm.
And that's really the practice of sensuality, which can mean candles dripping and silky nightgowns. Like, do that if you want to feel connected to your body and your femininity, and that feels like a win to you. But other ways to connect with your sensuality are, how can you practice being alive to your senses? So, for example, perhaps that's you having people over for dinner and having everyone put their cell phones in a bowl at the door, and you and your guests and your friends being present to tasting the
Mm.
food, to tasting and smelling the wine, to being present with conversations and listening to good music. That is being connected to your sexuality, because you're connected to your senses, and you are connecting with others outside of yourself. I think this
Mm.
is another reason why going to concerts can be so powerful, is you have a group of people who have come together to create something new and put it out there in the world. And isn't that what sex has the power to do? Sex is two people coming together and collaborating, right? You're creating a space together, intimacy and unity and pleasure and excitement and adventure. And sometimes babies are made. So
Just so
and
happens.
it just can happen that way. So let's zoom out of that. Back to the concert, what do you have? You have people that were compelled to get outside of themselves and create something new, an intimate, creative collaboration with other people and put it in the world.
Mm.
And that's powerful. I think we can have an eroticism and passion for life that leads us into creativity. I think connecting with our sexual energy is connecting with the power of creativity in our lives.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Well, you did go deep into both of those. So if I go back to the femininity, so
Hmm.
I know one of those things, women, especially I think these days, have a hard time receiving,
Yeah,
and
for
being
sure.
feminine is being able to receive. So
Hmm.
what do you suggest for women to be able to sink back down into being able to receive? Because a
Yeah.
man generally wants to be a provider, it's part of their DNA. And so when we strip that from them to give to especially the one they love, then we're almost stripping their masculinity from them. So what do you suggest for women, to be able to sink back into allowing receiving to come into their life?
Yeah. Well, first, receiving is a very intimate thing, right? And even if we think of if we're speaking of just a man and a woman sexual
Yeah.
encounter, specifically, like the female body receives, right? And that is the most vulnerable position for a woman to be in, is to receive
Mm.
that, to receive the penetration, to receive that. And so what do I need in order to receive in that moment? Well, I need to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
I need to feel secure. What are other things? And I know that there can be casual experiences where maybe not all those things need to be there for a woman, and that's okay. But I think if we're talking about in general, what is going to make me feel safe to receive? What do you need in an encounter to make you feel like you have it within you to surrender?
Mm.
Like receiving is surrendering. And so you don't feel safe, you're not going to surrender. If you don't trust the person that you're with, you're not going to surrender to them. If you don't believe that your partner has integrity, you're not going to let go and surrender. So first and foremost, what makes you feel safe?
Mm.
What makes you feel safe and secure to be in a place where you feel like you can come undone? And if
Mm.
you are in a relationship where you don't feel like you can come undone or surrender, be curious about that. What dynamics are at play? What 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 chasms or fractures in your relationship may be causing you to not feel safe? Perhaps can you lean into that, or do conversations need to be had with you and your partner, or do certain relationships need to be let go of? And then also, I do think zooming out a little bit, how you show up for one thing is how you show up for everything. So if we want to practice receiving, I think we can practice that in 1,000 different ways throughout our everyday life that have nothing to do with sexual or physical encounters. A huge thing as women, what we can practice doing is receiving a compliment. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Not, no, you. Or I love your shirt.
Or
I love
saying, "Oh
yours.
no, I thank you. I look good, but oh no, I'm having a bad hair day." And just
Yeah.
like backing it with something to kind of
Hmm.
tear down the compliment.
Yeah.
Actually, there was that actually was presented to me when somebody paid me a compliment and I kind of shut it down. And he
Hmm.
thankfully was very honest with me, and he said, you know, it's accept it, receive
Hmm.
it. And
Yeah.
that actually awoken me to it. So
Hmm.
I now, from now on, when I get a compliment, I'm like, thank you, I received that. And
Thank you
it's a
so
practice because
much.
he brought that to my attention that I was doing that. I was shutting
Hmm.
down a compliment when a guy, that's sometimes the most vulnerable he could be is by
Yeah,
paying you a compliment. So I think
absolutely.
that's beautiful.
Yeah, he's putting himself out there.
Mm-hmm.
He is letting his heart be known and be like, no, I don't like it, or you did it wrong, or man, it's so painful. Oh, I had an old boss and he was like, I don't like giving my wife gifts because she doesn't like me spending the money
Mm-hmm.
and she just returns it anyways.
Mm,
And he loved and loves giving gifts. And it was like this thing was shut down in him, and his wife loves him.
yeah.
She really loves him and had no idea how much she was because of her fear or control or scarcity mindset, um of how that was causing a fracture in their relationship. So how can
Mm,
you practice just saying thank you to the compliment? And then also, I think, ask for support. I think we have this idea of what feminism needs to look like or should look like, or what being a strong independent woman looks like. I don't need you. I got my
I
own
don't need
car, I got
help.
my own house,
Yeah.
I can pay my own bills. Great, awesome, do that. You be a capable, financially stable woman. But the beautiful thing about love is not that you need the other person, but that you want them.
Mm,
And
mm-hmm.
I think want versus need and obligation is, I think that's what makes love so powerful, is it's, I choose you because I want you. Not, I don't choose you because I have to have you. And one of my favorite rom-coms is How to Be Single. It came out like, if you have you seen it?
No. Mm-mm.
So cute. It has Rebel Wilson and Dakota Johnson and Leslie Mann. And Leslie Mann is a doctor and she is having a baby and she's dating this guy, and her baby was through insemination.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't through her boyfriend. And she was like, I don't need you. Like, I can do this on my own. And he's like, I know, but I want to do it with you. And so I think sometimes we feel like we have to prove a point, like, no, I can do that. Well, yeah, but honestly, like the other day I was hanging up shelves in my condo And my mom was like, see, you don't need a man. And I was like, no, of course I don't need a man,
Mm-hmm.
but I want one. And it would be nice to have one. And so in that, how can I practice letting myself need others or letting myself want others? So
Mm-hmm.
even if it's, hey, like recently I asked a guy friend to help me move my couch. Yeah, I could have done it myself. I could have figured out a way, but he was so grateful that I asked him.
Yeah.
Like he felt like $1,000,000 that I even asked him. And one small thing that I practice a lot is I travel a lot for work, and I'll always ask a guy to help me with my baggage in the airplane. Can
They
I do
love
it?
it.
Yeah, but I'm a very capable woman. I run 2 businesses. I can open the damn door. I can put my luggage in the
Yeah.
thing. But you know what? It's really nice when I don't have to. And I think part of stepping into the feminine is being willing to be vulnerable and hold the space for what it is that I want. Hey,
Mm.
do you mind helping me with this bag?
Oh, that's
And
beautiful.
and
Yes.
and that helps me have a rhythm in my life of receiving and also being able to what am I also doing? Communicating consent. I'm communicating this is what I want. And
Mm.
then a third really practical thing is when I have a man in my life, or it can be my dad or my brother or a guy friend, it can be totally platonic. But when I feel shown up for, I acknowledge it. Like I have a guy friend who, I mean, always just opens the door for any woman. If we're out, which hasn't happened in a long time, he just makes sure everyone is taken care of and everyone has a glass of water or whatever they need. And I'll say to him, gosh, thank you so much for holding that door open for me. It makes me feel like a woman, makes me feel
Mm.
really great. And just acknowledging the moment. I think so much about femininity as an addition to receiving is holding space
Mm.
and holding the space for vulnerability. And I think often as women, we just get so upset at men for not being mind readers. When one of my guy friends a few years ago was like, every woman is different. We want to please you. Please give us your playbook. So
Yeah.
tell them what you want,
Yeah.
communicate. And instead of being like, well, you're being confusing with me, like, where are we at in our relationship? Coming from the feminine's heart is saying, hey, I'm really enjoying spending time with you and I have feelings for you. And I just wanted to share that. And I'd love to have a conversation and see where you're at.
Mm.
Like, same conversation, but very different approach. In one, I'm putting a demand. And in the second, I'm holding space by leading with vulnerability.
Yeah. I think that's definitely something we have to continue to
Yeah.
be aware of.
Hmm.
Absolutely. And just because I want to really honor your time, so going back to the sexuality, so I know that your audience, you're waiting till marriage to be intimate, and then also I'm sure a lot of your audience is in the same path. So I'm sure you get the question asked a lot, like, I feel so much shame around this, like I'm dating this guy, I don't want to feel like he has to follow my rules, but
Mm.
I want to lead down this path. How could they feel less pressure and really going back to embracing that sexuality that doesn't have to be the penetration of just having sex?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a few questions there and a few ideas is one, it, whatever your boundary is right, period. So whether that's I want to have sex tonight or I do not want to have sex until marriage or yesterday I wanted to have oral sex but today I don't want to have oral sex, whatever your boundary is right.
Mm.
Period, the end. And it's so important to be with a partner or be with someone that doesn't just put up with whatever your boundary is, but honors it
Honors it.
and respects it. And if you ever are in a situation where you feel like someone is pressuring you sexually, they're probably not they're probably not a person I would ever want you with, because especially with the fallout of Me Too. And there's also something called hashtag church too, where
Mm.
so much of the sexual scandals in the church are rightfully being exposed right now. But I think informed and enthusiastic consent is more important than it ever has been. It's always been important, but now we're living in a time where so much pain is being exposed that like time is up. Like literally time is up to be in relationships, to put up with relationships where you are being pressured or taken advantage of sexually. So I think whatever your boundary is, you have no shame. Like you have permission to have a boundary. And it is 100% okay if the person you're seeing has a different boundary. You guys then get to have an open conversation about, okay, here's my boundary, here's your boundary. Is there a place where we can meet in a middle ground? Okay, great. Is that going to work for us? Okay, is there not a place that we can meet in a middle ground? Well, it's been so nice getting to know you. And this isn't going to work for me. So I think you have the permission to stand in your worth and stand in your boundary, whatever it is. And I think whatever someone's boundary is, whether they're having sex outside of marriage or not having sex outside of marriage or having one night stands or not, I think women are constantly made to feel guilty or wrong for having whatever their standard of boundary is. And so in that, I just want to like speak freedom, freedom from shame, and freedom from shame over having a boundary. Your no is a full sentence.
Yes.
Period. The
Yes,
end.
no.
Yeah. Whatever
Yeah.
the boundary is, you do not have to defend it. You do not have to have the perfect rhetoric. It can just be like, I don't want to have sex with you. Okay, great. You don't owe any more of an explanation. Or it can be, I do want to have sex, or I do want this or not that. So I feel like that's the first part of that question. And then, I mean, what I love about sex and sexuality is I think that it's so much more than one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think something that really expanded my mindset was reading a set of books by Peggy Orenstein. She's a New York Times journalist, and she has written a couple of books. One of them is called Girls and Sex, and the other is Boys and Sex. And she's spent 10 years doing case studies on men and women and their sexual encounters. And she has a professor in the book named Daniel Fortenberry, and he says that he says we should view sex more as a pool of experiences as opposed to like essentially a vertical race climbing a ladder to get to one spot.
Mm.
And Orenstein is talking about it in the context of like college hookup culture and how there's like this race to lose your virginity, or there's this race to get all your tallies up. And she says, who is the more sexually experienced person? The person who has a wham bam thank you man at a frat party, or the person who has like a 3-hour experience where they're having eye contact, they're massaging each other, they're both giving consent about touch me here, that feels good, or let's try this, let's explore this. And so in that, I think for a long time, as a person who is choosing to abstain from sex until marriage, I thought, man, this is so embarrassing. Like I'm such a sexual infant. But no, there's a lot of fun play that I have in the bedroom outside of sex. So I think if that is your standard, or even if you have all the sex every day, like let's be creative with how we explore sensuality and intimacy, and make sure that we're in relationships that we feel safe, again, safe to surrender and communicate and play or try new things. So that's what I have to say.
That's so amazing. I love it. I love that you say like there's so much more. And I think that we have to broaden our horizon of what that means to be sensual and sexual. And then, of course, I want to mention your book, Sexless and in the City, which is available for pre-order. And then when this episode is released, it'll probably be April 20th, you said it's going to be available.
April 20th.
So I know there's going to be so much more into depth about everything you share on your Refined Woman and Refined Woman Collective podcast. So I know there's going to be a lot more to dig into this book. So of course, I'm going to leave that in the show notes. So, just to end this off, if there was one piece of advice you would love to leave with women today, what would that be?
My goodness. You have the permission to take up space in your life.
Mm,
And you have the permission to ask questions about your beliefs, about faith, about God, about sexuality. And it's okay to go on a journey.
mm.
You have it in you, and you'll find when you go on it that you are not so alone. That there is a community of women all over the world that wants to cheer you on.
So beautiful. I love that. And you have your community. So, where could
Mhm.
people best find you and learn
Yeah.
more about your programs as well? Because I saw you offer some programs.
Yeah. So my book is called Sexless in the City, sometimes sassy, sometimes painful, always honest look at dating, desire, and sex. And you can go to sexlessinthecitybook.com to learn more about that. I have a really fun book trailer that I'm super proud of. And then I have resource guide that you can download to help take you deeper into each of the chapters. And you can order at Amazon, Kindle, Barnes and Noble, really anywhere that you buy books. And then my podcast comes out every week. It's called The Refined Collective, and that's anywhere you stream your podcasts. Come say hi to me on social media or my website, The Refined Woman. I love when people slide into my DM. So slide on in and let's talk. And yeah, I love talking about all of this stuff. So yeah, come say hey.
Amazing. Well, Kat, thank you so much for your time. There is so much goodness in just this that you shared today, but I know there's so much more. So, everybody go check out Kat and the Refined Woman, and you'll learn so much. There's so much wealth of knowledge she shares, and I know it's from the place of her heart. So, it's beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much, Kat.
Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome.